So now we can take that seed and farmers can use it to plant. So eventually a handful of seed replaces warehouses of chopped up potato that are being put in the ground. Hey guys, coming up, we are re-airing one of our most popular episodes to date. Last year, we had an awesome conversation with David Friedberg of the production board and Ohalo Genetics, also of the famous All In podcast. We had him on last year, had a great conversation. It's one of our most downloaded podcasts ever. And we thought we'd use this opportunity at the end of summer here. Big announcement on our side. My wife and I are expecting another child. And so this will be a part of my paternity leave, Tim. Our extensive Modern Acre paternity policy. So thank you for allowing us to re-air this episode.
Super excited to have a nephew, Ty, first one in the family. So super pumped about that. You were lobbying for a pretty extended paternity leave. You were going for like 2 months, something egregious. I countered with a week, and I think we settled somewhere in the middle.
Exactly. Somewhere between 1 week and 2 months. We'll see where that lands. But if you guys didn't catch this episode, I'm glad you're tuning in because I think there's a lot of great insight into this conversation. And if you did listen to it, it's worth a re-listen. So I hope you guys enjoyed this insightful conversation. We cover everything from the Climate Corporation to Ohalo to what's happening in the economy and ag tech trends. So it's a lot of really great information for you guys that you'll enjoy. This interview will be also published on YouTube. So if you want to go see the video version of this, go check out our YouTube channel at The Modern Acre. That will be linked in the show notes as well. If you prefer to watch our conversation with David Friedberg. So with that, we'll jump in. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. The Modern Acre podcast is presented by American AgCredit. American AgCredit is a proud member of the Farm Credit System, which was created more than 100 years ago with the sole purpose of serving the financial needs of farmers and ranchers. From small farms to the largest agribusiness enterprises, American AgCredit understands agriculture and how to structure customized financial solutions. Just like many of the guests we have on the pod, American AgCredit recognizes that the evolution of agriculture is inevitable and exciting. Their goal is to be at the forefront of this evolution, partnering with producers to grow their future in ways they haven't imagined yet. To learn more about American AgCredit and to receive exclusive access to reports from Terrain, a research and insight service of American AgCredit, visit agloan.com/terrain or hit the link in our show notes.
Hey, Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Great to be here. Long awaited, anticipated guest. We've been excited to chat with you. You know, we did a long form podcast all about the Climate Corporation. So we did research, crazy things on the internet, old podcasts of yours, talks of yours. It was eerily detailed. I don't know where you guys found all those facts. There was a lot of information in there that I was surprised was public. Super interesting. Yeah, we went into the dark recesses of the internet. So I wanted to, one question I had out of that, one really interesting part of the story is when you sold to Monsanto, obviously it was met with a little backlash and maybe a little bit surprising to you at the time. And you tell the story about your dad, and then you wrote a letter to your employees just about the acquisition and kind of detailing why and everything. Looking back on that letter, it was published on the New Yorker. Any changes you would make to that, or do you feel like that letter and kind of the thoughts you had are consistent with how you feel now 10 years removed? Anything kind of come to mind there? No, I still think a lot of people have an impression or an opinion on something without having done primary research themselves in a lot of ways in life. And that's true in agriculture. It's true in how people view certain businesses or people. And it's just become more apparent to me in the decades since. I've seen it repeat so many times over that everyone kind of latches on to a meme or what is kind of like the accepted tribal belief that we're all kind of aligned on versus thinking independently. I think that's generally unfortunately more a rare thing nowadays, which I think is scary in a lot of ways on where things could go. I'm hopeful, and this is also why I've tried to do the All In podcast and talk about this more openly is like, I really hope that people do their own primary research independently, think for themselves, and not just kind of latch on to some common belief or common statement just because it feels good to be a part of that tribe. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the benefits of your podcast and others of just hearing long form conversations about certain topics and not just buying into a headline that you read on an article and just taking that as fact of really doing your own research and digging in. So it's been awesome to hear you guys explore that in other long form podcasts as well. Well, we're excited to talk about your latest venture with Ohalo Genetics. You announced earlier this year you're stepping in as CEO. So just wanted to kind of talk through the decision to take that CEO role. You had an awesome exit with Climate. You were an investor at the production board with that foundry and had this really big breakthrough. And I think it's a big decision to jump back into that CEO role. So maybe just talk about kind of the conviction you had and why you didn't place a seed CEO that's done it in other parts of their career. Like, why did you want to jump on and take the reins?
Well, I said there's no way we can let this thing not work. So the only way I can feel confident in that being the case is if I step in and do it myself. And the reason I feel that way is because this business could be so significant, so impactful. The premise of Ohalo was that we could get plants to contribute their whole genome to their offspring. You're effectively converting meiosis to mitosis. Mitosis is the process by which cells divide in a biological organism, and they divide and they make a complete copy of the DNA. Meiosis is the process by which cells divide to make sex cells. So in humans, right, making sperm or ovary, a sex cell is produced, and the sex cells only have half the DNA. They only have half the genome. And it's a random half. It's a random selection of genes that fuse together to make that half. And so then when two sex cells come together, they form a new organism, half from the mother, half from the father. And you're getting half of the mother's DNA and half of the father's DNA. And the concept behind Ohalo was that if we could get sex cells to basically be the whole genome of the parent, of the mother or the father, and then those two sex cells would come together, you would get the entire genome of the mother, the entire genome of the father, and the offspring would have effectively double the number of chromosomes, double the number of genes, double the total DNA. And we see this in agriculture. It's called polyploidy, and it refers to there being multiple sets of chromosomes, more than two, in an organism. And the concept was if we could do this, we could actually do it. We should realize a couple of things. One is we should realize that we could stack traits together. So disease resistant from a mother, drought resistant from the father, but you don't have to make the trade-offs like you do in plant breeding today, where you give up other good traits in order to try and stack those two traits together. And so often plant breeding is this random like rolling of the dice. You're trying to combine two plants, and then you got to look at each seed, grow it up and see what happens and see what traits you got and what traits you lost. And so it's a very expensive, laborious, time consuming, and sometimes unsuccessful process doing plant breeding. But with this system, with Ohalo, we'd be able to stack all the traits together. And the second effect would be that you'd get more genetic diversity in the organism. And genetic diversity, like we see in hybrid plants, like what happened in 1914 when George Shull created hybrid corn, demonstrated you get what's called heterosis or hybrid vigor. The plant ends up bigger, healthier, faster growing than either of its parents when you increase the genetic diversity in the offspring, when you hybridize. And so the concept was in boosted, we should see the same sort of thing. We should see healthier, bigger, faster growing plants. So that was the theory. And that's why we started Ohalo. And my investment firm, the production board, we put in $40 million into this company over a 5-year period to support them getting there. And as of last year, we started to get all these results. We were able to change the genetic circuits that control for meiosis and mitosis and make this happen. We did it across multiple plant species. We were able to grow the plants back into plants because you're doing this to single cells at a time. And you try and get those single cells to think that they're plants and grow back, and then start to phenotype them or measure them. And in every experiment we ran, the results were incredible. The yield goes through the roof. Everything we expected would happen happened. The genetic diversity creates hybrid vigor, creates faster growing, healthier plants, bigger plants. Yields go through the roof, both vegetative biomass and seed biomass. So depending on the crop you're growing, you actually will see an improvement in yield, energy efficiency, resource efficiency, everything that we had hoped would happen would happen. So it was pretty apparent that the system that we built that we call boosted breeding could be applied to pretty much any plant, any crop. And it's time to kind of think about building a really important business here. And so that's why I stepped in last year to start to run the company full time.
my investment company, the production board, is the majority owner. We put all the money in up until a few months ago when we raised some outside money. But up until that point, we put 40 million in. We were the only shareholders besides the employees. And so, it just made sense that this could be such an important business that I should dedicate myself to it. So that's why I made the move.
No, makes a lot of sense. The takeaway I have is you're a control freak, right?
Yeah.
You want to jump in.
Well, I mean, over the years, I've had involvement in a lot of businesses where I'm on the board and there's a
Yeah,
CEO running the business.
yeah,
And you can advise someone on how they should run their business, but they're never going to run it like you would run it. You can say, hey, I think you should do this. And then they go and do something else. And once you've done that enough times, you realize that your role as a board member is really sort of to be an advisor that someone may not listen to your advice. And that's life, it's fine. And for some people that works and they have a portfolio of those sorts of things. And some of them work, some of them don't. But at the end of the day, it really is the CEO that's driving the outcome of the business, not the board. I cannot control a company. I cannot direct a company. I cannot lead a company from the board. I cannot make the decisions. I cannot take the actions. I said to someone, it feels like when you're on the board, every day you're waiting for shit to happen. But if you're the CEO, every day you get to wake up and make shit happen. And that's what it feels like to me, being able to step back into an operating role as CEO again, since first time I've done it since Climate Corp, is that I can kind of make sure that all the opportunities in front of us for Ohalo are realized and that I can drive that and help make that happen and step up and do the work I need to do to contribute to it.
what are you doing differently than you did it? Like, it's been a long time removed since Climate Corp. Kind of anything that you're doing different as a leader?
Look, I mean, I've got a lot of great people that I worked with at Climate who are working with me again at Ohalo. So my chief legal officer, Kevin, my VP product, Christy, my VP of AI and engineering, Eric. They were all with me at Climate, where we have a great set of experiences working together. So frankly, it's really comfortable and easy, I think, to get back in the seat. When I was building the Climate Corporation, I was a young first-time CEO, right? I started that company when I was 26 years old. We sold it when I was 33. Yeah. And I made all the mistakes you should expect a first-time CEO to make. And I dealt with all of the anxiety and stress and, kind of stupidity that I think arises from being a first-time CEO. Fortunately, like we still got somewhere good with it. But I feel like, being a CEO, again, it's really much more comfortable for me. Also because I've been on like probably over a dozen boards since then. I've seen a lot of there's nothing that phases me anymore. So I've seen everything go wrong. I've seen every issue from HR to commercial to fundraising to legal, everything that, would be a stressor in a first time CEO. I think I've kind of been through and seen from a different lens. I've also got the comfort of having capital backers and partners in my business. That makes it easier for me now, but certainly just as hungry and just as energetic as I ever was to make sure the business is successful.
Dave, would love to dive into the product roadmap a little bit. The product you announced recently was potatoes coming into market. You had talked about kind of just the huge addressable market that potatoes fills in the world calorie supply. So maybe just talk to us about kind of why you started there and kind of what's in the pipeline to come.
So we are public about potato. We've shown work in corn and we've shown work in Arabidopsis, which is kind of a model plant that's used to demonstrate these sorts of efforts. We have not talked about other crops. I can talk about potato, which I think is really exciting. So the global potato industry is about $100 billion a year. And I'm not sure if you guys have ever visited a potato farm, but potatoes are vegetatively propagated. So you don't put seed in the ground, you actually put leftover potatoes in the ground from prior seasons. And just like in the Matt Damon movie, The Martian, right? The potatoes kind of propagate and they grow. It takes about 10% of the biomass to get the yield out of the field. So you're basically replanting 10% of the mass that you harvest. It's an incredibly difficult and expensive process for a number of reasons. One is just the labor, the fuel, the equipment, everything you need to move all of that biomass, because it's an incredible amount of mass you get in potato. You have football field sized warehouses where you're storing all of these sliced up, chopped up potatoes. You have to fumigate, you have to coat them so that they don't develop mold and disease, but you still have a lot of mold, a lot of disease, a lot of fungal problems that propagate in that seed system, in that regenerative system. A whole supply chain that's built around how do you keep disease from propagating in this kind of supply of what's called seed potatoes, these chopped up potatoes. And it's a tough business. I mean, in the US, potato farmers are like fumigating all their acres just to keep the pest and disease risk at bay. And potatoes are really hard to breed. We're still planting russet Burbank, which is like a 100-year-old variety in the US. We don't see the sort of advancement in genetics and breeding that we see in other crops. So the idea with potato that we're trying to drive is number one, radically improving breeding. So we can take our boosted system and we can take what are called diploid potatoes, potatoes that are just like corn or humans that have two sets of chromosomes, and we can boost them, cross them together, and then you end up with a tetraploid potato offspring, which is the way most potatoes are planted today. They're planted as tetraploid. So all the best varieties of potato have four sets of chromosomes. They're more genetically complex. The yields are better than diploids. They're hardier. They have more vigor, et cetera. So we're creating entirely new tetraploid potato varieties, which are better than any of the varieties in the market today. So we're doing breeding. That's benefit number one is with our system, we can do potato breeding at an incredibly accelerated pace, like light years faster than anything else that's out there today. And then number two, that's really important, is we can make true potato seed. So people don't really realize this, but potatoes grow flowers and those flowers turn into berries and those berries are filled with the potato seed. And remember how I talked at the beginning about how there's a mother and a father to the offspring? In fact, with potato, you combine all the genomes, but also the genes get all jumbled up. So while a potato might make 12,000 seed from the flowers that grow out of that potato, every single one of those seed is genetically different. And if you take all the seed from a potato plant and put them in the ground, some of them are purple, some of them are yellow, some of them are red, some of them are white. They're small, they're big. All the genetic structure falls apart. Everything gets jumbled up. So you can't really use potato seed. That's why we vegetatively propagate potato today. With Boosted, with our system, not only can we breed potato, but we can then make uniform seed. So every seed that comes out of that potato is the same. So now we can take that seed and farmers can use it to plant. So eventually a handful of seed replaces warehouses of potato, chopped up potato that are being put in the ground. So you can move to a low cost, more energy, more environmentally friendly, a more efficient way of planting and growing potato. You can get new varieties to market quicker and you can breed and improve the genetics very fast. So that's why we're running our potato operation. You know, the US is only 5% of the global potato market. Around the world, potatoes are a very significant staple crop, third largest source of calories for humans on Earth. 85% or 90% of the potato grown in India, for example, are used in table potatoes. The average Indian family eats potatoes at two meals a day. So this is a really important global staple, and it's underbred. It's super inefficient. It's super expensive. And by the way, going to India, most of those farmers are single acre farmers. You know, they're planting by hand. They're putting all their net worth into the ground every year. It's super expensive. It's super inefficient. So imagine giving that smallholder farmer a seed. They can put seed in the ground and you give them better genetics. The yield goes up, water use goes down, fertility needs go down, and they can make more money and they don't have to store all this leftover potato and deal with all the disease and rot and stuff that comes with it. So we're really excited about the potato market. Folks have always said, like, if there could be one big seed market that doesn't exist today, it should be potato, if someone can figure out how to do it. I've heard that for years. So I'm really excited we can do that with Boosted at Ohalo.
Super interesting. Yeah, I know Tim and I were talking and hypothesizing before you announced like what crop are they going to go after, and I'll have to give Tim some credit. He threw out potatoes as an option, so
Yeah.
good call, Tim.
Tim, what made you say that?
I was doing some research online and I think I saw a board member from Lamb Weston, which I know is a big potato marketer, so kind of connected that data in that I saw like some ex-employees at Driscoll. So I was thinking either berries or potatoes was my guess earlier in the year.
The internet research we needed to do the climate episode. But cool. So I want to get into business model. This is like a common theme in, I would almost call it ag tech generally, of just like often there is value created. How do you monetize that value, right? Like, how are you thinking about the business model for Ohalo?
I generally think that ag products should be built and priced on a value creation system. So, you know, this is the Monsanto pricing model. If you're delivering an incremental $30 an acre of profit to a farmer, can you charge them $10 an acre for that product or service you're offering them to help them get there? So it feels like a 2-to-1 split of value, right? The farmer gets 2 times what the technology company gets for delivering that value. In a lot of cases, particularly in the software domain, it's very hard to measure and there's a lot of variability. There's a lot of beta. The alpha might be there, but the beta dominates the alpha, meaning you don't see it year to year. You see it over many years. And so it's very hard for folks to actually feel that that value is there and to pay for it. And that's one of the challenges, I think, with pricing models, particularly in digital tools and particularly in agriculture, is there's so much variability. It's hard to figure out what the real alpha is. Was it the weather that gave me a good year? Or was it your technology that gave me a good year? So it takes many years and field trials and other stuff to try and prove that to farmers to be able to get paid for the value you might actually be delivering. So that's a general kind of guiding principle for us is like, can we get value creation demonstrated to the customer or the partner and, kind of share about a third of that, right? Get paid about a third of that for that value. So like, think about the case of potatoes, right? That potato farmer today is spending somewhere between top line, that potato farmer is making about $5,000 an acre in the US. Okay. And that $5,000 of revenue is requiring an investment of $1,000 to $2,000 an acre. So 20 to 40% of revenue to deal with all of the planting and fumigation and storage and equipment and labor needs associated with the way that potato farming is done today and using seed potato. So now if you can get the revenue up to 6,000 or 7,000 and you can get that OpEx down because you're moving away from a traditional seed potato model, there's a lot of value share to be had there. So theoretically, could we get to a point where we could have seed that we're selling that works out to about $500 an acre? That's probably right. You could probably see that you could save at least create at least $1,500 an acre of operating profit improvement for that potato grower. And so that's kind of a guiding principle for how to do it. If you're how we think about value and value share. The potato market in the US is a little bit tricky because the US is very unique. Most of our potatoes actually go to fries and chips, potato chips. And so, there's one dominant buyer of potato chips and there's like three dominant buyers that process potatoes for French fries. So they all have a very, tight kind of hold on that piece of the market. The table potato market is much more fragmented, a lot of individual packers and providers, and then around the world, but the table potato market dominates. So it's a lot of smaller opportunities to kind of get access to farmers there. In different crops that we are going to work in at Ohalo, beyond potato, every market is different. One of the questions we have to ask is who has the germplasm, who has the genetics today? So if someone already has great genetics, they already have seed, they're already selling that seed to farmers, our business model might be to partner with them and share in the value on what we can do to improve their germplasm or improve their genetics, and just participate with them in the improvement that the farmers are going to realize down the road. In other cases, we might want to develop our own germplasm or our own genetics using XPVP or out of patent kind of material that we're legally and have freedom to operate to work with and develop our own material. And then how do we go to market? Is it through retail? Is it direct? Are there big kind of vertically integrated players that we can work with? So every crop, as you guys know, is very different. How the market is constructed, how farmers are making decisions on what to buy, how the genetics or the germplasm is developed, where it's held today. So the big challenge for us at Ohalo in terms of scaling is just like breaking apart each of these markets and figuring out where are we going to spend time, how are we going to provide value for the customer, and how are we going to reach the customer, and what are we going to be able to work with, and so on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You just mentioned distribution and wanted to talk specifically about potatoes. Like, how are you thinking about getting this product into farmers' hands? Is it a direct model, going more through the channel? And is there any potential synergy with other production board companies like Pattern Ag or Lavaro working through kind of ag retailers that are in your ecosystem?
Yeah, so those are all possibilities. When you first, and I had this at Climate, and I've dealt with this at a lot of other businesses, you always want to try and get the first couple of customers first. Okay. So you don't need to build the model that reaches everyone everywhere all the time immediately. You got to just go get some customers and get the product moving and then iterate from there on how do you scale. So, the good thing in the potato world is there are a good number of pretty sizable operators. And as you guys know, there's a distribution on that adoption curve in terms of how many of them are forward thinking and how many of them are conservative. And you find a couple of the big ones that are forward thinking and they become your early partners and they get benefit by doing that. And that's who you start working with. And then you start to think about other ways to reach the market and scale. So I'm not going to be too prescriptive right now on how do we get to every farmer everywhere in the world right away. My goal is just to prove value, get some customers, show that it works. And as it does, I think we'll iterate and figure out the next couple of steps.
Dave, I want to circle back to almost where we started around critical thinking and primary research. Something that's brought up a ton is genetic modifications, right? There's been a huge push over the past decade or two of non-GMO, and a lot of people who stand by that, and that's gotten, had some success in the retail channel. Like, how do you think about genetic modification, and for people that say we shouldn't be messing with our food and that's hurting the nutritional value of the food? Like, what's your general take on that?
There's a lot of words that get kind of lumped together, okay, that are all kind of treated as the same. So I think we should be really thoughtful about how do we talk about what humans do with plants, okay? So you guys know, like, the old teosinte plant was a little tiny grassy leaf, like, looked like this big. And over 9,000 years, it turned into the corn that humans farm today through a process primarily of selection, meaning every year or every breeding cycle or every growth cycle, farmers, humans, would pick out the biggest ones that made the biggest seed and made the biggest cob. And eventually they got these huge, corn on the cob type plants that are, umpteen feet tall and create a ton of yield and create a ton of biomass and are really efficient. And process every time there's a new generation, whether it's in a mammal or an animal, in a plant, in a bacteria, there's a spontaneous mutation rate where some number of the base pairs on the genome mutate and change. In plants, on average, I think it's one out of every, I think it's times 10 to the 8th. So probably, what is that, 10 million, 100 million? One out of every 100 million letters are just changed in the next generation. So you fast forward a lot of generations, you got a lot of mutations happening. You also have this process whereby the genes are merging from the mother and the father, and that's creating new genetic diversity. And so that's creating a change in the genome. And so every time there's a new offspring of any plant, there's a new genome, there's a change in the genome that happens. And what humans used to do was be, I would say, observant, right? We would kind of look around and be like, okay, things are changing in the world. And then we got a little more active where we did selective breeding, where we picked the biggest ones, and we called those the winners. And so we were, I would say, guiding the evolution of plants, guiding the evolution of the genome. And then we started to be able to read the DNA. And that's called marker-assisted breeding, where rather than just look at the physical or phenotype, physical characteristics or phenotype of the plant, as it's called, we would look at the genotype or the genetics of the plant. And we started making selections about which plants we wanted to cross together and being active about crossing plants together and being active about selection based on the results that came out of the genome. So, all of this is on a spectrum of how do we drive the genome of the plants to realize the physical characteristics that are beneficial to us as farmers. And that's created what has enabled humans to grow to 7 billion plus people on Earth today, where less than 1% of the industrialized world has to work in agriculture. It's really incredible if you think about our ability and the engineering that we've realized to do that. Now, there is a technique where we inserted foreign DNA or foreign genes into plants that's now generally called transgenic, and in the popular parlance is called GMO. That system allowed us to introduce proteins into plants that aren't native to that plant. So in the case of BT corn, we put the gene for Bacillus thuringiensis into corn that produces a protein in the corn that kills rootworm. So now the rootworm eats that protein, the rootworm dies. It doesn't affect humans. It's a neutral protein to other organisms. It's targeting the rootworm. And it was an amazing invention. It was really amazing engineering. But people freaked out because you're messing with DNA. You're moving stuff from one organism to another. This new era of what people are calling gene editing, but now is being called new breeding techniques or NBT, is all about applying proteins to the cell of a plant that actually turn certain genes that are native to that plant on or off. And so you're not introducing foreign DNA, or you're not doing transgenic methods. You're basically doing something that would naturally happen in the plant. Certain letters would go on or off, certain letters would be cut out, which we see in the natural mutation, in evolution, we see it in breeding, but we're able to be more targeted about it. So rather than wait for the plant to do it, we can say, hey, let's do this right now. And because of that, it's being largely deregulated. So in the US, we have a group under the USDA called APHIS And they're responsible for oversight on what's called gene editing or new breeding techniques. And effectively, you file what's called an RSR, regulatory status review with them. And as long as you're not introducing new proteins that create pest or disease risk in the environment, they kind of sign off after a couple of weeks and they say, great, go ahead. Like that product can go to market. We don't need to regulate it, which is a lot different than the way GMOs are regulated, where the USDA and the EPA and the FDA all have to come in and provide oversight, cost billions of dollars, just like a pharma drug to get these things to market. So these NBTs are totally transforming agriculture. The EU in February adopted a resolution to move the NBTs out of GMO regulation into their own separate category, and they're going to be regulated eventually, just like the US. Now they're doing this thing where they negotiate with all 27 member states and they come back. So I think that this is going to create a transformative advantages in agriculture because now we can apply these proteins to plants and be very directed about what we want the plants to do versus waiting for them to do it randomly at some point by running, millions of breeding cycles or thousands of breeding cycles to see it happen. So it's a very powerful set of technologies. And I do think that particularly to answer your other question around consumer awareness and trends, look, GMO got this terrible rap and it was poorly managed from a communication point of view. If people understood, as I described it, that all that you're really doing is getting the plant to produce a protein that it otherwise wouldn't produce, and it's got some benefit, like now it doesn't have rootworm eating the plant, it's good for farmers, good for the environment, et cetera, et cetera. It's a different way of describing it than I think the way that the general kind of messaging took over, which is you're messing with nature. I mean, what is nature, right? We've been breeding that little grass seed into huge corn. There isn't a single organic crop on earth that wasn't bred by humans, that didn't have some human breeding component to it. But humans are part of nature. We're also separate from nature. Everything we touch and do, you could argue is part of nature or is completely separate of nature. So, you could sit here and get your head in a tizzy all day arguing about, what's natural, what's not. At the end of the day, humans are farming. We're engineering the earth around us to grow things. And the question is, do we want to do that in a more sustainable way, in a more productive way? Or do we want to put human lives at risk and, use more of the land, use more water, use more carbon, use more energy, et cetera? I think everyone would agree that we want to do things in a more sustainable, lower footprint way. So the GMO story got lost. And I think that this new breeding technique, but I think that that's been largely not changed, but it's become more background noise now. I think there's other stuff that people are more worried about in their food, right? Consumers have a wonderful way of going from one trend to the next, one fad to the next. Anti-GMO was a great fad. It lasted for a while. But now I think there's stuff to worry about, like plastics and phthalates in our food supply, which I've talked about on the All In Pod. I think there are other aspects of how we've industrialized food systems that are worth paying attention to. And I do think consumers are going to pay more attention there. Sugar was a thing for a while. So the thing with consumers is there's always the next fad. These new breeding techniques are so benign and they're so different and they're really going to become so ubiquitous. And there's such a win-win-win. I think that we're going to see pretty wide adoption because farmers are asking for it. The benefits are so obvious. It's easier to explain and help folks understand. So I do think we're seeing them kind of become a little bit more popular and without folks, kind of raising an arm saying technology is bad. Let's get rid of these things as we did with GMOs. All right, that was very long-winded, I know.
Super helpful overview. Dave, wanted to circle back to Boosted and really talk about value creation at the consumer and retail level. Like we see a lot of produce companies differentiating with proprietary varieties. You see Cosmic Crisp apples up in the Pacific Northwest. Driscoll's has their sweetest batch. I think even Pairwise created their own consumer brand for retail. So maybe just talk to us about any opportunities there where there could be Ohalo branded produce in the grocery store.
Yeah, I think we could see that. So it could be awesome. And it's going to be better than anything it's competing with. That's the goal. But yeah, our breeding systems create a lot of advantages. And so we can create really valuable phenotypes, physical characteristics that are good for farmers. So they're agronomic phenotypes and also consumer phenotypes. So creating really high quality products for consumers that are nutritious, flavorful, that are shelf life, longer lasting, all the things that I think matter. And so, yeah, we are kind of going through this process in certain markets, specialty markets, obviously not commodity markets. That's where that plays out. And, we'll find ways to kind of partner with folks that can help bring those products to market.
All right, so Ohalo's going to change the world. Sounds good. Great idea, great business. Let's move on to kind of the ag industry as a whole. Like, would love to get your perspective on other stuff that's happening in the space. Like, if you weren't doing Ohalo, where's your attention going in terms of the technology and innovation happening in agriculture? I'm curious your thoughts about regenerative agriculture and kind of what that means, or if there's like another area, AI potentially transforming the space. What other stuff is interesting to you within the ag ecosystem?
So I think that the ag market is going through a lot of fantastic innovation cycles right now. Everyone views the ag tech market negatively because the returns for the ag tech investor class isn't there. But that doesn't mean that ag tech isn't innovating and that we aren't improving productivity and bringing value to farmers and improving the quality of our food systems. It's just that we put too much damn money at work too quickly and assumed that it would all be able to pay off. And as we know, in the ag markets, the cycles are long. I mean, I always tell people like at Climate Corp, if you miss your sales window by a couple of days, you got to wait another year. In enterprise software, you get to go sell next week again. You get to keep your sales cycle going all the time. In ag tech, you have seasonal cycles that you're kind of stuck to. You don't get the results for a while. So there's this cyclical problem. There's a lot of competitors trying to do the same thing problem. There's a lot of commoditization where folks thought that there was unique value and they didn't look at the commoditization chain, where how quickly are things going to fall off and become ubiquitous as opposed to proprietary. And so there's a lot of these aspects that I think have led to negative returns for the ag tech VCs. But that doesn't mean that farmers aren't benefiting from improved systems. So we've got biologics. I think that's a fantastic market, right? So these are microbials or microbial proteins that can replace traditional synthetic chemistry in fertility, in herbicide, fungicide, insecticide. So these products, and also RNAi. So in the biologic space, there's a ton of innovation happening in pheromones, new proteins. So all sorts of great innovations happening in the biologic side. In farm equipment, automation, machine vision, incredible. Like cutting out labor. Like who would have thought that doing harvesting in specialty crops, you'd have like 5 companies doing the same thing so quickly. It was sort of like this really hard thing to do, and now suddenly everyone can do it. I'm not saying it's done, but I'm saying we're pretty close to seeing it done because the underlying technologies, the models that allow for machine vision-based tooling, the control systems for the physical hardware in automated harvesting type systems is there. So autonomous, automated, machine vision-driven systems are, I think, becoming, kind of coming to market quickly. So, and then obviously in genetics, like what we're doing at Ohalo, it's just transformative, the potential in pretty much every crop. So those are kind of like 3 areas. I think digital's challenged. Digital, it's just like everyone assumed that I could create a drone monitoring product or create some data layer and get paid for it, right? I think the general issue is number one, that data creation is commoditizing. And number 2 is you can't do great predictive modeling without the integration of other data sets. So one image of a field without knowing what was planted, when the fertility application was done, what the yield was last year, what the soil type is, those are data layers that are necessary and need to be ingested to go along with the new data layer to be able to make a recommendation to the farmer about what to do to optimize outcomes. And so I think there was a lot of money poured into ag tech digital software companies that created novel data layers, but didn't necessarily integrate the other data that was necessary to have a higher quality prediction coming out of it. And farmers don't want to pay for data. They want to pay for results. So that's kind of a very hard thing to do without the integration of data. So I would say in those 4 categories, digital, biologics, seed plus genetics, and then farm equipment, there's incredible innovation in biologics, but a lot of money went into it. And, a lot of those are going to be negative returners, but there's still an incredible, for farmers, benefit and innovation that's coming out, and they're all going to grow. Farm equipment, similar, a lot of money went into it. I mean, think about it. If something cost $100 5 years ago to do and it costs $2 to do today, the VCs who put $100 in 5 years ago are not going to feel very good, right? That's kind of what's gone on in that system. Same with digital. And then in seed and genetics, there's going to be this whole world of transformation that I think is underway. But, again, some VCs will rush in with money and they'll think that there's going to be a gold rush. At the end of the day, like with everything, there's a power law of returns. So there will be, one big outcome and then a whole bunch of money burnt. And so if you're not in the big outcome, you burnt money. So I think that's kind of what's gone on. That's why everyone's kind of negative, is like we put too much money in and most everyone lost money, but it doesn't mean that the market isn't working and the technology isn't improving.
Totally. I've seen it firsthand kind of from our farm of early on a couple of years ago, seeing technologies that were kind of nascent that were specific to certain crops and now starting to get commercialized in our area. I was at a tomato transplant demo day a couple weeks ago where they were demoing 3 different automated transplanters, and it's actually commercial in the field in our area. So starting to see stuff that's more relevant for a lot of farmers. So it's been cool to see that progress over the past couple of years.
Totally. I mean, like if you guys go back, like when I started Climate Corp 2006, the first thing I did when I got a seed check to start the company is I went out and bought weather data. And I bought it from a company called RMS that sold weather data. The sales guy was a guy named Jeff Hamlin. I'll give him a shout out because he still works at Climate Corp to this day. I hired him so he sold me a CD-ROM of weather data. It had the daily temperature and rainfall going back 30 years for 200 stations. So you could put it in a spreadsheet. It cost me $10,000 to buy that CD-ROM. It was 17 megabytes of data. That's like as much data as you get when you take a photo on your iPhone now, or 2 photos on your iPhone, pretty much. And I paid 10 grand for that. So that gives you a sense of like how much things have changed, right, in 18 years. But like every year, the cost of data was dropping by 80, 90%. The availability of data was improving. So we were always a couple steps ahead of Climate Corp. So we had this like very advantaged, unique platform at the time. But so much of what we were doing 10 years ago when we sold the company is like commodity ubiquity stuff today, right? Like that's how quickly the market's changed. And that'll be the case with the underlying technology for all of these things we're talking about and all of these subsegments in ag is like, are you investing in something that's about to become a commodity? And how do you build an advantaged business to make sure that you can get there? So I think that's like key. And then at the end of the day, like great entrepreneurs will always find a way. So, to all the VCs that bet on, McKinsey analysis and reports, you're not going to make money unless you find a great person, I think, to drive it home for you.
Love it. Well, that's a great place to wrap it. Dave, thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, great to see you guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that conversation with David Friedberg. As a reminder, Tyler's got a newborn on the way. He's registered. And if you don't know what to get him, the man that has everything, just leave us a rating and review for the podcast, share it with a friend. That really mean a lot as Ty is changing diapers on paternity leave here.
Yeah, it'd mean a lot. That'd be a great gift. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. So subscribe to all the above. It actually helps us out a ton. It gets the word out to more people. So appreciate that and appreciate you guys listening.